Tanse ni Totemtek, Kathy Richardson Nitsigassen, Kinu Esquio Nitsigassen. I'm here with a very good friend of mine, Dr. Zeina Ismail-Allouche in Tiohtià, the unceded lands of the Kanienkehá. And as a Métis scholar and displaced person from the West Coast, I acknowledge the land here, the traditional owners, for whatever, like owners, caretakers, the people that loved this land and took good care of this land for generation after generation so that people could actually live here today. I honor those people. I honor the grandmothers and grandfathers, the elders, and our spiritual helpers, the guides, our ancestors on the other side, and our line of ancestry that goes back to the first humans on the planet. It's always interesting to think, for example, if you think about the first grandmother, you were descended from the first grandmother of your lands, and I mine, and perhaps that goes back in 4 different lineages. It just shows that we're not really alone here when we show up. We have all these people, these beautiful people, and we walk on their shoulders. And one of the things that's important to me is to really locate the work that I'm trying to do and the work that Zeina is trying to do. And I would say in evolving consciousness of love and collective care and peace on this planet. And I know some of you will say, oh, but look around. I don't see much love. I don't see much care. I don't see much peace. But I do believe that when you look into the groups of people around you, your friend groups, your activist groups, advocates, some of your colleagues, even people that have pets and care for the animals on this planet, I think we can all identify people that are doing love work, care work, repair work. My partner's Jewish, and they talk about tikkun, this loving service to repair the planet and the wounds. And it's in that kind of energy and spirit that I welcome you. I'll just call you Zeina, or I can call you Dr. Zeina.
No, please. No, please.
But I have to say, moving to Montreal here in 2014 was an interesting experience for me. It was really eye-opening. I too was moving to another country, even though so-called British Columbia is in so-called Canada. Moving to Quebec is like being in another country. And so I've experienced some of these aspects of transition and diaspora and grief, longing for one's people, one's community. I can't claim to have that experience as much as people who've moved from farther away to come here. And you are one of those people, and I'm just so blessed to call you my friend. I met you about a year in when I was here, and we were in the same kind of circle, looking at Indigenous methodologies, looking at trying to hold up and support youth, young people, and trying to bring a critical light onto the systemic violence that's hurting children. And we were both stunned at the similarities between the violence against Indigenous families and Indigenous children here and that which you experienced in your home country of Lebanon. So I'm going to pass over the feather and ask you just to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got here.
Yeah, thank you so much for this introduction, Kathy. And I'm so honored to be your friend, and to have been around you and around amazing Indigenous women in Tiohtià, Montreal, where I learned a lot. not only about the history, but I've learned a lot about how to reconnect with the inner self in the relationship with the land, with the moon, with the sun, with the wind, with the tree, and also appreciate the care that I was surrounded with from those amazing indigenous women in the space. So yeah, I come from far, but I would like to say also, Kathy, regardless of the distance, that feeling of being uprooted from one space and landing in another space, another land, I think it's the same, regardless of the distance. And we all do that move because of perceived needs, and I would say also perceived needs resulting from a certain level of pressure. Let's say it violence, but in a way or another. We don't make such moves without carrying a weight. This is at least my feeling. But what we do with that weight is important, whether it makes us think or it helps us to be grounded. So yeah, I come from Lebanon. If you've asked me 3 months or 4 months ago when Lebanon was subjected to that war, from the south of Lebanon, from Israel, at that moment, I was claiming back my Lebanese identity as a form of resistance. But I hold that it's how say it, like there is a tension in my relationship to the Lebanese identity, because I think and I feel and I witnessed that these colonial layers that we carry in Lebanon as a country that was colonized for long years. But we have that sense of gratitude and also sense of like Stockholm syndrome. It's the gratitude syndrome. I wrote an article yesterday about this gratitude syndrome that children and youth living in care will feel, because they have to feel that gratitude towards the system that is exerting violence of them. So anyway,
of course, yeah, you can't fight the hand that feeds you is the problem.
So,
yes, of course.
So this is why I had this very unresolved, unreconciled relationship with the Lebanese identity. So I used to say that I come from Lebanon, and I'm still learning and to unpack the colonial in me. Arriving in Canada was also a process of unpacking and also reconciling with the settler identity that I battled with. I resisted at the beginning, feeling that I was colonized, coming to here. It was not a choice. I was certainly leaving behind also things, memories, relationships. So how can I carry the weight of being a settler? But I've learned my way and resisted. But then I understand that I'm here on unceded lands, unceded indigenous lands, that I did not take permission from the indigenous people. I will not say the owners of land, because again, the caretakers of the land, because I carry with me the teaching from Josephine Bacon, who speaks about Nutshemet, which is the land, but not only the surface, its womb. And she says that we cannot owe a land. The land doesn't belong to us. We all belong to the land as if we belong to the womb, the mother earth. Yeah, so this is from where I come. The first door that was opened to me in Montreal, in Tiohtià, I keep on saying this was an indigenous door. The first person who accepted to supervise me in the PhD journey was Métis, Elizabeth Fast, who also connected me to you, to Vicky Boldo, to amazing indigenous women who taught me a lot. And here I am. We've been together since 2016, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am a mother, so Jad is 26 years old. He is in his second PhD studies. He's doing also, he's also revisiting the memory of wars through a research creation project. He's a musician. His project's focusing on lamentation in a way to reconcile also with the memories of wars that he did not live, but he lives them through me, in a way, through my memory.
Yeah.
Yasmin, she's finishing now her first year of master's in clinical psychology in France. I'm still waiting to have, for that time when she also unpacks and reconcile with the learning, because she's learning the mainstream psychology, and then you will see. So yeah.
Yeah, and so I'll just remind everyone that's listening that I did an interview with your son, Jad, on here about lamentation. And I learned more about you and your family life, your history. And I was just really moved by some of the stories he shared, and particularly how you took your family to the country and you went out on a boat and he showed film, you were all singing together and you were doing all these beautiful, joyful things to distract your children from the fact that there was a war going on. And so beautiful, that spirit of care and protection and
resistance, I guess, like
resistance. Yeah.
Yeah, because like the war is meant to not to kill us in terms of like the bodies, but also in our spirit, in our ability to laugh, in ability to exist, in ability to connect and hope that tomorrow will be better. And I think these were acts of resistance at that time. And we also carry the duty of telling the stories of what we've been through.
Yeah.
But not when we are surviving. We need to have such kind, like a distance to be able to recount the story of surviving wars. But while surviving, we need to think beyond that.
Yes, what's on the other side? I'm just wondering, I was going to read your bio. I'll type it in the intro. And it says you're a decolonial scholar, a storyteller, and an advocate with over 25 years experiencing challenging the systemic and colonial violence that targets children and youth, especially those forcibly separated from their families, cultures, and lands. So my question, which is you already answered to some degree, is when did you start seeing yourself as a storyteller?
Yeah, actually, I think I started telling my stories when I came to Tiohtià, Montreal, because then it was a way to resist the erasure of my identity, because the immigration process is also perceived or is experienced in order to arrive and survive. in the country of immigration, one is asked to forget and to leave things behind.
Mhm.
And they focus only on the gains coming from the move. And it has also a colonial concept in it, because we're moving towards the north. So the north is much better. It means we're upgrading ourselves, as if coming from that part of the world is not worth anything. So connecting with my stories and trying to equip myself with who I am at every single moment was a way for me to assert my identity, even if my identity carries tension. But it's the process of saying that we come from something. And so this is how I started sharing my own stories. But it was also a way, because in the PhD that I was working on, the PhD project, the research methodology was about inviting individuals who experience forced separation through adoption to share their stories and to create a performance. So it was very essential for me to undergo the same process that I was inviting the participants, the collaborators on the PhD project, I'm inviting them to do. So in order to understand what type of complications in terms of threats, risks, safety, ethics of telling those stories, in order for me to understand this, I needed to undergo the process myself. Also respecting indigenous methodologies, it was a way to position myself in this sphere. So this is who I am. This is from where I come. These are my stories. This is how I'm going. I'm sharing them in a performative way. So exposing myself to the same potential risks that people with lived experiences of adoption might be subjected to. So, and this is how I started to find my voice. And also, while finding my voice and telling my stories, I was understanding the layers of colonialism that I've lived, and I was able to unpack them in relationship with the people who are listening to my stories. So the way I shared my stories I would say, has evolved in the relationship with the people who are receiving the stories, or in interaction with the other stories as well.
Well, as you know, I participated in a community gathering where you gave voice to people who had been stolen from their families and their lands. And as you said, you put yourself in it to really understand. And I just wanted to say that I thought that work was it was profound, and it was really courageous. And I just love depth, and I can't I can't really stomach that kind of, oh, let's just keep everything superficial and we'll be the distant researcher, because it's so phony, right? And so these people, it was very spiritual, and how their struggles were witnessed so closely, and some of them may not even be alive on the planet anymore, but you just felt that the witnessing was happening, like maybe they were even there with us, maybe appreciating that we were remembering them, like you say, especially in times of fascism. Remembering is so important, because the leaders, they want to erase I remember Milan Kundera wrote a book, The Book of Laughter and Forgetting, when he Czechoslovakia, and the Soviets were erasing history, and now we're seeing that in the United States. Let's take this history, this events out of the school curriculum. We don't want kids to learn about slavery or civil rights movement or anything, and so keeping it alive is really precious and important, hey?
Yeah, and it means a lot for me that you mentioned Milan Kundera, because my early awakenings on books and novels was through Milan Kundera. My mother used she was a French teacher back then, and she used to have all those amazing books. And the first book I've read for Milan Kundera was the Intolerable Lightness of the Human Being.
Yeah, The Unbearable Lightness.
Unbearable,
what a title, hey?
Because you spoke about depth, and then I had this in mind, the unbearable lightness of human being.
Well, it's another point of connection, because I read all his work.
And then we never spoke about this.
Never. No, and I went to, Russian occupied Czechoslovakia, and I met activists and people that were involved in theater.
Yeah.
Who were dissidents. And that was part of my political education. It was so beautiful.
But talking about remembering and remembrance, so Sinfield, he is one of the main oral historians who worked on in South Africa. So he worked on oral history projects of survivors of the apartheid. So he says that the inability of people to tell their stories of surviving violence is considered by itself as mass violence. And I think, again, telling our own stories is a way of resistance, and this speaks also to the indigenous ways of telling the stories and the oral history tradition, and to resist through reviving and speaking the language and telling stories from back then, listening to elders talking about their ways of surviving and resisting colonialism. And the fact is that it was only through that storytelling that indigenous people were able also to exist, despite the genocide.
That was our school, sitting in a circle and having stories shared, and that's how people learned. But speaking of resistance, before you became a scholar and came here, you were involved with many high-level NGOs and international organizations, and I sense that's where you discovered a lot of the corruption that was going on towards children. Do you want to say a little bit about that work that you're doing? Because I know that it was, let's just say, influential.
Yeah, as I said, I come from a long journey in terms of unpacking the misdoings coming from those international organizations that incarnate also colonialism in the way they approach communities where they land with no previous understanding of the context of the culture. They come with their, Samsonites loaded with tools and recipes that they want to parachute on communities, telling them these are the solutions for you. So let's speak specifically of the institutional care, the residential care, the forced separation, and how I started working on the synergies between the history of forced separation and stolen children in Canada and what happened elsewhere. So I keep on mentioning this, like the famous declaration of war against children in 1920, when the residential schools were established as a way to get rid of the Indian problem, and the famous declaration by Duncan Campbell Scott at that time saying, I want to establish residential schools to get rid of the Indian problem by separating the children, putting them in those, we agreed that we call, not to call them residential schools, but to call them prisons, where children, if they survive, like literally survive, they are assimilated in a culture that doesn't speak to who they are as spiritual beings. Unfortunately, the same model of care was reproduced in every single country all over the world that experienced colonialization. So in Lebanon, for example, this model of care started in 1940. Like it started even in the 1800s with the church going and establishing those schools to bring children into Christianity. The so-called slogan was to save them from poverty by placing them in those institutions, but the real mission was really to separate them from their communities and detach them from their own way of thinking, etc. And the tragedies that were produced in the residential schools / prisons in Canada was reproduced also in those countries. And then when Canada moved into the era of the forced adoption, like the 60s coup, we were still in the phase of institutional care up until 2006.
Okay.
When the truth of reconciliation, not the truth, the work on the testimonies of survivors of residential schools, prisons in Canada started to come out, the UN at that time realized what's happening, and they moved into a new strategy, which is let's close institutions and residential care in the world and move into adoption. So instead of thinking, let's move back into preventing separation, investing in families, work on the poverty or the systemic violence that is pushing families to put their kids to put their kids in institutional care, they moved into where Canada was starting to realize that it was also a mistake, quote unquote, though we all know that Canada is still witnessing forced separation, because we know that Indigenous kids are highly represented in the child welfare system till today. So these are analogies that I started to realize, especially when countries, especially in the Arab world, were intimidated by the fact that they ban adoption from a religious perspective, because in Islam, adoption is not allowed because it plays around the lineage of the child.
I see.
So we were intimidated by the UN jargon that, oh yeah, because we're Arab, majority are Muslim, they're not civilized enough to accept adoption. However, the concept was like, let's work on preventing this forced separation. And unfortunately, the work of the international organizations facilitated the transactions.
Mm.
I would never say it's a transnational, international adoption. From our side, it is documented that it was about child trafficking. It's a business.
Yes. Can I just add a point here?
Yes.
I think three kind of categories of reality for those parents who had their children taken. One is that the systemic violence killed the parents and the parents were actually dead. One is that the parents lived, but the system and the adoptive family lied to the children and said, your parents are dead, and took them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess
or they disarmed the families. In a way, they thought that the best thing for their kids is to be separated from them. So there is the physical disappearance, or the conviction that was implanted in their minds that they're not good enough.
Yeah, and that's what happened. Even you heard so many stories at the TRC about this. It's like the state implanted this idea. I was not parented by my parents, so I don't know how to parent. And that kind of thinking, it completely negates the concept of resistance. You know, if somebody is treating us badly, we don't say, okay, I'm going to become a parent and I'm going to copy that and treat my child badly. What you say is, I'm never going to treat another human being like this. This is terrible. And so you make commitments and you do your best to do things differently.
Yeah, in Arabic we say it's the same meaning that فاقد الشيء لا يعطيه. It means that those who've missed on something, they cannot give it to their kids. And like I don't, of course, I don't agree with this at all, because I think this will help people, but also if they are supported to heal from the systemic violence, that they will give even much more. But the problem is that intimidation and humiliation facing the savior. So that is, again, we were talking about the Stockholm syndrome, the gratitude syndrome. How can you not be grateful and just accept the solution and let go?
Yeah. So in Canada, we had depending on the stats that you use, but we had a very high adoption breakdown rate with Indigenous children. It could have been anywhere between 60 to 90%.
Yes.
Dr. Raven Sinclair has documented.
She speaks about 90% of breakdown.
Yeah, so 90% adoption breakdown. So you had the situation in some cases, and I think in your case, like in Argentina, when the generals actually killed the leftists and then adopted the children and pretended that they were the bio parents. And then what's happening now is those children are like in their 20s, maybe a bit older, and they realize that not only do their parents, they're not their parents, but they killed their bio parent, their real parents. And so a lot of the adopters were wealthy colonial people, and they'd have often maybe a big family, and they'd have an Indigenous kid in there, like Jean Chrétien, for example. I mean, I'm not saying that it was all bad, but from a colonial perspective, it would, in some cases, it was like a handbag. I have this beautiful accessory. It's an Indigenous child. And Vicky Boldo talks about that, like her adoptive mother, going out with the baby carriage. And people would look in and say, oh, you have a new baby. And they would go, oh, the baby's brown. And she'd say, oh, I'm just babysitting for my friend. Yeah. Like it was all this
racism
and then we relationships with these children. They didn't.
And we've heard stories, similar stories coming from individuals who come from South Korea, adopted in Belgium, who experienced the same type of exotism, but also racism from within. Lebanese adopted in France, for example, or in Denmark, there are patterns in that forced separation and being placed somewhere where it's not organic. They don't fit. They don't look like they don't look like their parents in the photos. And honestly, I always ask this question: what type of relationship, parenthood, that might exist in a healthy way when most of the adoptive parents, especially when you're talking about transnational, international adoption, they did something illegal to get the child. And we have to agree, Kathy, for me, I always use this analogy, it takes two to tango. So there are illegal processes in terms of adoption in the place, in the country of origin, falsified documents, falsified birth certificates, etc. But there are countries in the north who just accept to allow this falsification, those illegal acts, to be legalized at the entry point of their countries. So
it's a form of trafficking.
It is. It's not a form. It is, because everything is handled through transactions.
Yeah.
And I recently worked on documenting it's transactions, but also it's an act of war. So it's a subtle act of war. So what happened in Gaza lately, and we all agree that children there are subjected to a form of violence that beyond any word, okay? But anyway, we don't compare violence to violence, it's violence. But there is massive killing. The number of children deprived of they live on their own. Now we're talking about 17 to 18,000 kids without any form of support.
Yeah.
Even kin, huh? And we've documented cases of abduction of newborns or babies taken by the army and being transported for international adoption, mainly because it will bring income. So we're talking about thousands of dollars in Lebanon. One adoption might, like processing one adoption, I saw documentation of the families paying up to $100,000. And it's not the mother, the pregnated mother,
No,
is getting the money.
no.
It's all the bureaucracy to falsify the documents, to escape the country, and to enter the other country. This is the chain where the money is being spent. This is where it's being spent. So it's a chain of money laundering, trafficking, falsification of documents. And we know that these processes intersect with human trafficking, with drug trafficking, with weapon trafficking.
Yeah.
It's the same mechanism.
Yeah. Well,
so it's not child welfare at all.
No, it's not. It's really important that you're putting these processes to words and naming it. You know, as you've noticed recently, not everyone can look at what's going on, and not everyone can hear it.
It's hard.
So shocking, right? It's so shocking for us. And yet it's happening. Like I said, you know, there's people that are really anchoring in and trying to preserve justice and human rights and social justice and, collective care and decency on the planet, and that there are those who are descending into violence and covering up and, misrepresenting truth. And so you have to be quite committed and vigilant, and you can really get attacked sometimes.
Yeah, I have to confess that one of the reasons, in a way or another, we left Lebanon was that we uncovered traffickers that are active until now, and it's still happening. The same way that is happening in a different way within the child welfare system in Canada. So the decision of separation is taken by a system that is all grounded in colonialism.
Yeah.
Like again, like when you don't understand the language of the family, you don't understand the culture of the family, you don't understand the situation of the family, you deprive families from basic services. You don't support families to heal and reconcile. So you come and you take the decision of separation to be placed in spaces that are not safe.
Yeah.
So we separate them because of the potential risk within the family, to be placed in spaces where the risks are higher.
Yeah, for sure. I just did an interview conversation with Sarah and Miriam Memchut, who you met at your conference, and they were also reflecting on that from their cultural perspective as Algerians who live here, but also in the larger Arab community, saying that, even if there's violence in the family, or even if the men are using violence or acting in aggressive ways, there's no services for them, and everyone is so afraid of child protection coming in and breaking up the family and taking the kids away. And that's exactly how Indigenous people feel, and Indigenous people are highly targeted, but so are other marginalized groups. So it really prevents people from talking about it, from reaching out, from doing healing work, because of the surveillance of the state and the great risks of having your culture and your family destroyed, basically.
Yeah, and Kathy, we keep on saying it, that there is nothing that is more violent than the system violence. So
yeah,
like compared
in that container, right? That
comparing the individual violence to the systemic violence, this is much more violent. And then, having said that, today I witnessed something that stayed in me. Like I feel the moment to share it. I was using the metro, and then there was one of the STM officers talking with two young men. The three of them are racialized. The three of them. And then I saw the STM, instead of filing a ticket, he was talking to them, and there was a kind of, like, you can see they were talking and there was a kind of understanding. Then he shook hands with them, and he used his card to allow them to pass.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, I was looking, and I waited for them to pass, and I waited for this person to look at me. And I told him, thank you. It was for me, it was a moment. We're not saying, let's encourage people to break the law. It's okay that violence occurs in the family. I'm not saying this, but it takes a moment of real understanding of the system that is creating that kind of situation.
It's so dignifying to see somebody like that, because it costs so little to be kind.
To be kind, and then the act of shaking the hands,
Yeah.
like equal to equal,
Mhm.
even with the situation where this person used his privilege, but he understood, and I think intuitively, that shaking the hand will elevate the youth to a
Mhm.
second level. I saw the dignity in the face of the youth, and this guy, like, when like I made an effort to wait and allow him to see that I saw.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so beautiful. And that other layer
Yeah,
of you
it's
witnessing and
yeah,
letting him know that you really were moved, you really appreciated what he did. It was
yeah.
an act of real generosity and care for lots of people who
Yeah,
witnessed
I
it.
think we need, like, given what's happening around us, we need to send those signals to each other that I witnessed, and it's not that I appreciate, I am grateful that I witnessed that, because it gives us hope that we can resist. As you said, it takes that much to be kind,
Yeah.
but that kindness will will change a whole story, the whole narrative.
And the metro should be free. Come on, let's just say it. It should be free for people, right? But
It's
here,
not just kids
yeah,
commuting
they're
to
children.
school.
Yeah,
Hey, hey.
yeah, yeah,
Anyway, like, yeah, I'm happy that, like, I'm chatting with you today, because I wanted to share that moment, and I felt that, like, what I witnessed was so precious, so precious. It taught me a lot,
yeah.
me a lot.
And it's those beautiful moments and stories that just fill your heart. And I have some colleagues that I work with, Alan Wade and Shelley Dean, and a whole bunch of other beautiful people around us. And we've heard so many stories from, like, the elders, the Casca elders in Yukon. They were the little kids that were in those prison camps, and they talk about acts of care, things that they did for each other, to look after the little ones, to steal food to feed other people, um, you know, stealing cigarettes from the nuns, and going and knowing they're going to get caught, but doing it anyway because they just couldn't stand the oppression. And these stories, they just fill your heart, because it shows they do know how to care for other people and younger people. And it just cracks all those stereotypes that we were
Mhm.
talking about earlier. And
But it
yeah,
takes also, Kathy, it takes and not an effort, a repositioning to view those stories from that perspective.
it does. Yeah.
It's yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because of, well, the nature of the psychology that's used on people. Um, yeah, that's a whole other, it's a whole other episode of our podcast.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
let's just stay with that beautiful feeling of dignity today. Yeah, like I was telling you about these flowers. Well, I was coming home. Where are they? Here.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, this beautiful bouquet of flowers still wrapped up in the florist paper on the sidewalk, but on the top of, recycling and sort of waste. And I thought, these are beautiful. I took them home. So I felt like, you know, the universe gave me a bouquet of flowers today.
So
And
you got your flowers today, and I got this amazing gift in the metro station today.
yeah,
So yeah, the word will reward us in a way or another.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I guess before we wind up, I'll just say that, yeah, there's some beautiful things happening or movements in child welfare, especially in British Columbia, and we have to change the name of that province. It's absolutely ridiculous. But because the NDP government gave the right to care for children and make these
Sovereignty, yeah.
back to the Indigenous communities. So we're on a path of hope there. And like you say, reorienting, restructuring, how to do this in a culturally centered and dignifying way, because it certainly is possible. And there are wonderful people that work in the system, which is broken and corrupt. And so I acknowledge them too. But we have so far to go. And this is particularly painful because these are the children, you know, the young ones. I think we adults, all of us from every nation, we should be taking much better care of all the children of the world, not just our own children.
Yeah, we owe them, because also they bring us the laughter, those moments of affection, the smile, the ability to be free as a child. So we owe them that care. And as you're mentioning those amazing initiatives taking place, knowing also that it's not new, like the indigenous way of caring for children was before colonialism. It's just like going back to the essence, to the core, to the to the way of caring. So these are practices that I'm learning from, that I've also mentioned in the PhD project as a way, as a process for healing for those who were separated, by reconnecting with their identities, with their lands, with their community, with their language, with their ties, with their network, but also as a way to prevent separation from the land, from the community. We all know that some children might need care.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's within the community, within the culture, within the language, not by being uprooted.
No, we always
Yeah.
had, all the aunties and all the uncles and
The kin.
our brothers and sisters were what white people would call their cousins sometimes. And the neighbors were all called cousins. It was one degree closer in how we talked about the circle and the grandmothers, the grandfathers, and everybody helped raise the children in some way. And
Yeah.
it wasn't completely destroyed.
Yeah.
They tried, but like I said, you can go to the Yukon and visit these beautiful communities, and that culture of care is still alive. It doesn't mean there aren't violent people, because there certainly are, but you still have these networks of connections, people that have grown up together for years and been through these experiences together, and they're still all best friends, and they all help each other.
Again, you mentioned violence. Like, who is to measure what is more violent? And again, there is the system violence.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do believe that communities can uphold those kids and care for them within their communities. And it's also a way to bring the community back to its essence by bringing that center. This is what you've learned also from indigenous ways of being together, that are centered around kids. And what colonialism did is that they removed the center, so the system would collapse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then they could mine. It's about mining and
Yeah.
petrocapitalism. And so, like I said, it takes courage to witness it, to name it, to speak out publicly about it. And also we're all witnessed by the moon behind you there. We're all living under the same moon, and I wonder what the moon would say about us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you said once, we have that blessing of looking at the moon, and we all look at the moon from different places, and we connect because we can see each other through the moon,
Yeah.
wherever we are.
Mhm. So thank you so much for having this conversation with me and sharing about your work and your passions and what you've been trying to create in the academic space. It's so vital and important.
I would have never been able to do it without your support.
So thank you everyone for listening, and I'm going to put a link to one of Zeina's articles below, and if you have any questions, you can email me and we can keep the conversation going. So hi all our relations.